Greetings, friends. This summer, our denomination will host its General Assembly in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, General Assembly is the every other year big old gathering of the entire church. And while we do it every second summer, this year's General Assembly is particularly special. Because you see, we'll be voting to call our next general minister and president. That's the highest office that we have in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And we have an excellent candidate. It's the Reverend Terry Horde Owens. And I wanted to give you a chance to get to know her a little bit before this summer's election. And I thought, what better way to get to know a preacher than to hear her preach? And so, this morning, what you will hear is a sermon that Reverend Terry preached back in February. You see, in addition to being the Dean of Students at the University of Chicago Divinity School, where she has been working for the last decade to help shape the young ministers in our tradition, Terry also serves as the pastor of a local congregation. She has a full-time job serving the wider church and then a part-time job serving a local congregation. It was at that local congregation that she preached this sermon that you'll be watching right now. It comes from the Matthew text that Reverend Al just shared with you. And in this sermon, you'll get to find out all kinds of wonderful things about her. It just so happens that this was the last sermon that she preached before she was formally named as our candidate for general minister and president. In this sermon, you're going to find out that she is a Midwesterner through and through, a woman of faith through and through. You'll get to find out that she is an excellent theological mind, a wonderful storyteller with a vivid sense of humor, and you'll even get to learn what she thinks of Justin Timberlake's most recent movie. So friends, it is my honor and my pleasure to be able to introduce to you the Reverend Terry Horde Owens, our next general minister and president for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
When I was in the second grade at Thompson Elementary School in Terre Haute, Indiana, I used to walk to school with all the kids on the block. Our school building was old, and we didn't have a cafeteria, so those were the days when you walked for lunch. Does everybody remember? Some people remember those days. You didn't even take your lunch to school, you walked home. And my mother would meet us at home and make our lunch every day. And one of my best friends, actually at the time, my very best friend, Patty, she lived down the street, and in fact, her mother was our after-school babysitter. Her mother did not work, so when we came home from school in the afternoon, we would go to Patty's house and stay there until our mom or dad got home from work. So Patty and I were really, really close. We were in the same class, we played together at recess, we were hanging out together after school. Patty had older brothers and sisters who had Jackson 5 records. And so we shared a love of Michael Jackson as well. We were always dancing to Jackson 5 records. Well, one day, I can't even remember why we got into an argument, but we got into an argument. And we got to school, and we were in the classroom, and we had this little chair of reading circles. And the routine was that the kids were in different reading circles. When it was time to practice your reading, you went and sat in your reading circle. Patty and I were in the same reading circle, and we were both just looking at each other and refusing to sit next to each other. We normally always sat next to each other, and we never had any problems getting along. But on this particular day, we were really not talking to each other. At recess time, the teacher asked to see us, and we went back into the cloak closet. Does anybody remember the cloak closet? And she said, Mrs. Side, her name, Iris Side, I see her now. She had those big round glasses, tiny petite little woman. And she said to us, Terry and Patty, I'm not sure what the problem is today, but you need to decide whether or not you will be friends. If you're going to be friends, you need to forgive one another and move forward. And if you're not going to be friends, then you just need to treat one another kindly. You don't have to talk with each other. You don't have to play with each other, but you do have to be kind to one another. Patty and I looked at each other. We kind of rolled our eyes. We went out to the playground and we played hopscotch together. Patty is still my friend today. She still lives in Terre Haute, Indiana. She still attends the church where we grew up. Her mother, who used to be our babysitter, just died a few weeks ago, and I was in touch with her. And I didn't talk about that incident because we've never talked about that incident since we were in the second grade. And as I've been thinking about this sermon and reading all I could read about what does Jesus really mean about love, scholars are actually pretty clear that Jesus, instead of being some sort of highly theoretical, mystical person about love, Jesus sought to give us some opening into ways in which we could live inside a relationship with God that would help us live more fully in our relationship with our human beings, fellow human beings. When Jesus was asked by the Pharisees, which is the greatest commandment, he repeated commands that are in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, those two commandments we see repeated throughout the New Testament. And here at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says not only love, but he has some really interesting examples of boots on the ground, day-to-day moments where love must be expressed. My hope today is to express to you that Jesus is interested in us living a practical kind of love, of making choices moment by moment, day by day, situation by situation. We're not walking around holding hands, singing Kumbaya all the time, are we? Mostly not. Have you ever seen the movie Trolls? Has anybody seen the movie Trolls? I preached about a line from the movie Trolls in California. But there's another point that I want to make about trolls. The trolls in this movie, every 2 hours, their little flower watch on Princess Poppy goes off. And it's hug time. It's time to hug. And there's one little troll, Branch, who's played by Justin Timberlake, who's just not into the singing and the hugging and all that kind of stuff. Because he has suffered a loss, and you don't learn about this until later in the movie. But the one good thing about the trolls is that the trolls believe that happiness is inside you, that there's nothing externally that will bring happiness to you. You have to kind of make that decision yourself on the inside. Their enemies, the Bergen creatures, believe that happiness only comes if you can eat trolls. So they're after the trolls because to eat these deliciously colorful creatures, you'll be happy. And it's the great joy of the trolls ultimately to win their fight, not by hurting the Bergens, but by helping them understand where real happiness comes from. We don't live in a world where we're stopping every 2 hours to have hug time.
Maybe we should.
Maybe we should. My college choir, we used to have this practice at the beginning of rehearsal that we have some hug fellowship time. And maybe we should think about having some hug greeting time here at church at the beginning of worship. Psychologists have said that if you have 8 hugs in a day, you will thrive emotionally. And in college, when you tell people that you need 8 hugs, or you will not thrive emotionally, you know where you are in college. And so we always used to say, oh no, but I need all of these hugs in order to thrive emotionally. But day by day, situation by situation, we are called upon to really put to the test this concept of loving not only our neighbor, but loving people as Jesus describes them, our enemies, doing good to people who don't necessarily do good to us back. These are difficult moments. These are challenges, as we talked about with the children. And that's where it comes really to the test, to see how much we really understand about the love that God is calling us to live out before the world. Just like Mrs. Sy told us, Patty and I, that we didn't have to hug each other. We didn't have to sit next to each other. We didn't even have to be friends. But we needed to be kind to one another. She was not going to allow us to roll our eyes and stomp away from each other and be rude to one another. Even if we were not friends, we had to be kind. And I believe it was us being called to account, to be kind, that helped us and our second-year-old selves to figure out that at heart we really were friends. And we quite honestly, as I said, never talked about that. I can't even remember what started the argument. She is somebody that I make sure I see when I go to Terre Haute, even today. I want to read this passage again in the Message Bible. And I want you to listen for examples that Jesus is giving, concrete examples of moments in which a choice must be made to love or not to love, to be kind or not to be kind, and in some cases, to go beyond what the law requires. It says, here's another old saying that deserves a second look. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Is that going to get us anywhere? Here's what I propose. Don't hit back at all. Someone strikes you, stand there and take it. That was hard for me as a kid. Someone drags you into court and sues for the shirt off your back. Gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. And if someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit-for-tat stuff. Live generously. You're familiar with the old written law, love your friend, and its unwritten companion, hate your enemy. I'm challenging that. I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer. For then you are working out your true selves, your God-created selves. This is what God does. He gives his best, the sun to warm and the rain to nourish, to everyone regardless. The good and the bad, the nice and the nasty. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anybody can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. In a word, what I'm saying is, grow up. You're kingdom subjects. Now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously toward others the way God lives toward you. This is boots on the ground, day by day, making a choice as to how we will respond when people are not kind and gracious to us, when people disagree with us, when people are downright rude, when people do things that annoy us. Yesterday, as I was boarding the plane, Group 2 was being called. A man just walked and edged his way in front of me. And what I did in light of the sermon that I was going to preach today, there was a woman who was waiting to get in line. And I said, oh ma'am, please, go ahead. I said, I'm trying to set an example of what one should do when other people are rude. The man in front of me, her, kind of turned. I'm not sure if he heard or understood, but I felt better It helped me to diffuse the annoyance that I felt. We had been waiting, our flight was delayed for 2 hours, and it continues to amaze me how people move through the world without any thought about the impact of their actions on other people. I talk to my graduate students about this all the time. I hope as we talk with our children, the constant reminder to be kind. Like Patty and I were taught, you don't have to be best friends. You don't have to play together at recess. You don't have to agree on anything. God's love doesn't mean that we are buddy-buddy. To love you doesn't mean that I worship and adore you. To love you simply means that I show you the grace that God has shown to me. The grace to forgive, the grace to see past your imperfections, because God has seen past mine. The grace and the love to simply understand that you have as much a right to walk in the world as I do. That my disagreements with you don't mean that I get to destroy you or wipe your dignity away. I hope that you'll take this message of love and think about it day by day, situation by situation, boots on the ground. Once we leave this place, once we're no longer in the aura of worship, that we'll remember that God said, live into this life that you've been called. Grow up spiritually and learn that when you are called to love in those difficult moments, make the right choice. And the world will be better and brighter, and God will be pleased.